Hey, good morning. Oh, I ended up without even being able to see myself. Okay, good morning. It is a Tuesday morning, and that means it's time for Tuesday training and tactics. Thank you for those of you who are here. Thank you for those online. I am going to be going over the buyer inspection notice and seller response form called the BINSR. I know it's a truly loved form that everybody truly enjoys. So we are going to spend a little bit of time, but let me give you a little heads up, right? So probably to give a preface, the BINSR is probably one of the forms. The issues in a BINSR could probably be resolved by proactively addressing concerns with your buyers before they ever get to the inspection. So let's keep that in mind as we go through this. We're going to go through the actual form itself. I'm going to read the form, but think about it. For those of us at almost every home, done a lot of inspections, right? Cracked roof tiles, high loop on the dishwasher, TPR valve improperly plumbed, right? Those things are pretty common things. Oh, wait, the anti-siphon valve on the hose bib, right? The $2 item that gets buyers all wigged out that they're going to poison themselves. And it's like, it's $2 at Home Depot. Really? Please don't put that on your inspection report. All right. So before the inspection ever occurs, prepare your buyer, especially your first-time home buyers. So you'll see kind of a potential script here for those of you online. Hopefully everybody's seeing that. If not, everybody online, I cannot see the chat. So if you would like to make comments, please unmute yourself, ask questions. There will be several times I'm going to ask if you have questions. But the idea here is with your buyers, explain to them to be prepared to see 60 to 80 pages of inspection items, right? How many of you have had a first-time home buyer and they get this huge report? They've sat through the inspection summary and they get this huge report and they panic, okay? Why is that, right? Make sure you're setting expectations with your buyers. Keep in mind and make sure your buyer understands that an inspector is paid to find things. They're paid to do that, right? Don't worry, the house is not falling apart. Well, unless it's, falling apart, actually a total scraper. And we actually have somebody that in this office that's selling a home that is literally taken down to the studs. Whoa. Like, okay. So, but make sure they understand and hopefully the buyer is available to be able to meet with the inspector for an inspection recap. At which time you can ask them, the inspector, what items they think are most critical and or most costly, okay? This is where getting to know your inspectors is very important. This is a controversial issue. I always liked as a listing agent to attend my inspection reports. There are some buyer agents that don't like that. I tried to tell people, which nobody would believe me, that I don't talk during inspection reports when I represent the seller, and it is very true. I stand in the background and I literally listen to hear what is being discussed. I preface that and make sure the buyer's agent knows as soon as the inspection summary is given, I leave to give the buyer their time with the inspector. Now, the reason I bring this up is I once had an inspection. It was an FHA deal. The buyer's agent it was like their first transaction. And the inspector somehow offered a discount not to write the report up because the home was in such bad condition, they felt the buyer shouldn't buy it anyway, and they'd give them a discount not to do it. So there was no report, so there would be nothing given to the seller. If I had not been there, I would not have known the items that needed to be repaired for an FHA buyer, which were totally reasonable and things and that could have been done. And I called the agent and, oh, well, we're canceling. I'm like, why didn't you ask for some of these repairs? Well, I didn't know we could do that. Like, oh my gosh. Okay. So, off my soapbox for the listing agents wanting to go there, but please understand that you do need to communicate with the seller those repairs, and we'll talk about them a little bit. But typically you want to create a list of 5 to 7 items to ask the seller to repair. Now, that's not a hard and fast rule. But as we discuss things, as I go through this, you'll see why I'm saying this as setting expectations. If you set the expectation that everything the inspector comes up with, the buyer should be asking for, who is that going to help?
Yeah.
Is your deal going to go through
Probably.
if you're the buyer's agent? Probably not. Okay. So let's get started. So, the BINSR is probably one of the most nuanced contract documents. And with that comes a lot of difficulty to making sure everyone is doing it correctly. And there are definitely ways to do it correctly. So we're going to go through those today. We will probably take up this entire hour just discussing this one document. A couple of reminders for those online. Please mute yourself if you're not right now, but then again, if you want to ask questions, please unmute yourself. I cannot see you, and I cannot see the chat. So this class should be on my YouTube channel by the end of the week, and a sneak announcement on my YouTube channel probably within the next month or so. We'll all be going onto One University to our very own Paradise Valley channel. So I'm very excited about that.
Cool.
So yeah, we're going to have our own channel on One University. So, all right, we are going to see, oops, let's see if I can actually start the poll. I cannot. Hold on a second. I have to stop sharing to get to my poll. Let's see. Hold on. Come on. Let's see if I can start the poll from here. I'm gonna get more. There we go. Let's see if we can get the poll. All right, I'm going to launch this so people online should be able to see this and can respond. I don't know how many of you are on there. I'll read the questions for folks here. I did all that. Oops. Okay, so let's talk about a couple of questions. These are true and false questions. Number 1. A buyer may request a monetary credit in lieu of repairs on page 1 of the BINSR. And folks here, let's hold off. We can answer. But folks online, go ahead. You should be able to access that. There we go. We got 8 people online. Or, yeah. So number 2, true or false, a seller may respond with a monetary credit in lieu of repairs on page 3 of the BINSR. Number 3, true or false, if a buyer rejects the premises. Oh, no, there are more. It just scrolls down. The online, they should be able to see them. Okay. Number 3, if a buyer rejects the premises on page 1 of the BINSR, they must provide a reason for rejection, aka disapproved items. Number 4, a buyer through their agent is to deliver a copy of the inspection report to the seller at the same time they submit the BINSR to the seller. Number 5, the buyer requesting on the BINSR that the seller have an HVAC technician evaluate the AC unit and make any necessary repairs is a valid request. Okay, I'm going to just give a few more seconds for you guys online to answer. I got a couple that are split, a couple that are absolutes. That's interesting. Okay, a couple of you aren't here. Yeah, we got 2 more people. I can give you another 10 seconds here. How about here in the room? You guys can help me out here, but a buyer may request monetary credit in lieu of, I'm going to end the poll here, in lieu of repairs. Everybody's in agreement there. The answer is true. As of 2022, this is allowed with proper language. We'll go into that in detail, okay? Number 2, a seller may respond with a monetary credit in lieu of repairs. True or false? True. Again, that's true now. Number 3, if a buyer rejects the premises, they must provide a reason. This is split out there. The person that said false, that is not correct. The answer is true. They must provide a reason. And again, we'll discuss that in a little bit. Number 4, the inspection report must be submitted with the BINSR.
So-
Not a surprise. This is an interesting split here.
I send it immediately. I don't wait for the BINSR because the BINSR, it takes a little while to get all that stuff.
Okay, so we've got true and false here, and the question is actually false. This is a little bit of a trick question. It is actually required per the contract to be sent upon receipt. Any inspection, anything to do with the property, if you have a sewer inspection, if you have, somebody come out and quote a repair, all those are to be passed on to the seller. And that's in the contract, folks. Okay. So again, that's the trick question. It is not to be sent with a BINSR. It is actually supposed to be sent immediately when you receive it. A buyer asking the seller to have an HVAC tech evaluate and repair the unit is valid. We got a little split here. That is false. The buyer must complete their own inspections before must complete their own inspections before we're requesting repairs. All right, let's see. I think that's just flipping pages here. Let's hope I don't drop these because we don't have we don't have numbers on them. Okay, so all right. So let's get on to the actual document itself. Now, I am actually going to go over this line by line. We'll watch the time here, but we want to go over this and make sure you are following along and understanding why the different things are here. Obviously, at the very beginning, let's start with the fact that this is the residential buyer's inspection notice and seller response. Couple of you have ended up finding the commercial version of this. Please make sure it says residential. They do look somewhat similar, but they are not. The other thing is this is dated October of 2022. Make sure you're using that version, okay? All of the contract information at the top, the sellers, the buyer, the address. And by the way, if you noticed, it's premises. That is what it says. Does not say property. So whenever you're referencing, you always want to say premises with a capital P. That's going to align with your header, right? Buyer, seller, premises. When you put some reference to that and say seller, it's capitalized because it's coming back up to line 2 or buyer coming back up to line 3, okay? So now that they're referencing here, the next section that talks about buyer inspections and investigations completed, see section 6J. This is why they're referencing that, right? Because 6J is from the contract. So this is a reminder to the buyer, right? Buyer has completed all desired inspections. I'm sorry, inspection period items, right? All items. Buyer has completed their physical, environmental, and other inspections and investigations. Any inquiries and consultations with government agencies, lenders, insurance agents, architects, and other persons and entities. So let's stop here for just a second. That insurance agent is a big one, right? So I always talk about insurance with houses runs in 2 ways. One with the property and one with the seller or buyer, depending, right? But in this case, with the seller first, if that seller has called every time somebody in the neighborhood has had an issue and called their insurance agent and said, oh my gosh, what if my window was broken? What would my insurance cover? Every time they make those calls, those are logged as claims, even though they're $0 claims. So a homeowner can end up increasing their insurance by making all these claims. Because what does the insurance rep have to assume? They have to assume that it's not a what if, that's that old, yeah. I've got this friend, wink, wink, that has this issue. They have to assume it's happened to this property.
So they literally take it down as a claim.
It is absolutely logged as a claim. It's a $0 claim if they don't proceed with that. So the home gets a list of things that get claimed against it. So you do need to have your client get their insurance to make sure that it's done during their due diligence period, right? So many buyers and agents don't even think about it. And then all of a sudden at the end, we've got title here, right? So at the end, I'll put title on the spot here. Roberta, what happens at the end? When the lender's going, where's the insurance? And title's trying to scramble, right?
We don't get insurance, the lender gets it.
Oh, okay, all right, I put you on the wrong
Not
spot.
my issue.
Not your issue. But what happens,
I do have to have it from
the lender must have it to close, folks. And at the end, if you can't get it in a timely manner, you're gonna be delayed, right? But the other thing is, what happens if all of a sudden you need flood insurance, or they can't obtain insurance, or it's way higher cost than they were expecting? Okay, so please make sure your buyer is aware that they need to secure their homeowner's insurance during their due diligence period. So when you start talking about saying, oh, let's just do a 4 or 5 day, inspection period, make sure you're talking to your buyer. They need to be calling their insurance company. And when I talk about getting, their homeowner's insurance, that means a written quote. That doesn't mean talking to 16 people and having them say, yeah, I got you covered. That's $1,000 for that property. I doubt it's $1,000 unless it's a trailer, right? I mean, I'm sorry, but really, insurance is very expensive right now. Anybody has been a homeowner. Mine went up by a third, I think, after the fires. We didn't have fires, right? They weren't here, but California, everything going on with all of that, all across the board, insurance went up. So please be sure to do that. All right, let's get back to this. Investigations of applicable building, zoning, fire, health, and safety codes. By the way, who should be making those calls if that's something the buyer is looking into? Oh, the buyer.
Fire advisory.
I know, yeah, buyer advisory is a good one, but I know agents that want to help their clients out. Please do not do the investigations for your client, right? Because if you end up saying, well, City of Phoenix said da 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 da, and then 2-3 months down the road, they call the City of Phoenix and get somebody else that says, that's not right.
Right.
I don't know who they talked to. Who is that going to come back on? You.
Yeah.
Please don't do that. Okay. So inquiries regarding sex offenders and the occurrence of a disease, natural death, suicide, homicide, or other crime on the premises or in the vicinity. E, inspections and investigations pertaining to square footage, wood destroying organisms or insects, sewer, flood hazards, swimming pool barriers, and insurance, and inspections and investigations of any other item important to the buyer. The square footage is kind of an interesting one. So oftentimes you may notice that there's a difference between what is being reflected in the MLS versus what is in the tax records. Sometimes it's easy to find out why. And we have a copy of a previous appraisal, or we've had the house measured or something similar. In this case, I'm commenting on some of the things that Leah out of our Goodyear office mentioned, because this is her slide presentation. But she was saying that they did have a case where the property still appraised, right? Still appraised, but the appraiser found that it was actually 300 square feet smaller than what was marketed, and it wasn't other than that there was misinformation provided in public records. That's all we could figure out. But the buyers were extremely irritated and they attempted to cancel based on the fact that the square footage was less. Now, the problem is you walked through the house, I don't know how many times. This was way past their inspection period because, again, it wasn't discovered till the appraisal when the appraiser does that little diagram, right? You've had no problems with the house, the layout, the size so far, but all of a sudden appraiser says, hey, you actually have 300 square feet less. And now it's a problem for you? Now they're probably thinking for their future, it could affect their future valuation because it did appraise, remember that. But again, if that was a concern to them, they needed to have the house measured during the due diligence period. They did not have a leg to stand on at the time of appraisal. It appraised. They cannot cancel based on the lack of square footage. Buyer has verified, right? Buyer has verified all information deemed important, including the MLS or listing information. So often we say that the MLS information is FYI only. It's not guaranteed or promised. So any information contained therein does not need to be examined or investigated by the, or it does need, I'm sorry, does need to be examined or investigated by the buyer, and all other information obtained regarding the premises. Buyer acknowledges, right? This, we're down here. Buyer acknowledges that all desired inspection period inspections and investigations must be completed prior to delivering notice to the seller, right? That's down there on A under buyer acknowledges, okay? All inspection period items disapproved must be provided in this notice. Buyer's election is limited to the options specified below, and buyer is not entitled to change or modify buyer's election after this notice is delivered to the seller.
One shot.
Yep, well, there you go. There's a little apple to the side that Leah put on there for exactly that reason. In legal jargon, you'll often hear from from AAR that they get one bite at the apple, one shot, right? Exactly what Roberta said, one shot. I liken this to the fact that as soon as you end and send over your inspection, the table has turned and it's the other person's time. If you think about a clock switching from one person to the other, once it's been delivered, your time is done and the time clock is on the other person. I can't tell you how many times agents call me. Yeah, we just wanted to add. Nope, you're done. You
Yeah.
cannot make any modifications. Okay. So they get one shot, one opportunity to present their BINSR. We'll go over it. Yeah, we'll get there. But yes, so they need to make sure that they've completed all their inspections and investigations prior to doing so. Strategically, this is probably wise for them to wait until day 9 or 10 to submit the BINSR, just in case something pops up during that time. I know listing agents right here are going to get frustrated and say, no, 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 get it over as soon as possible. Let's get working on this. Of course, don't do anything that's going to delay closing, but that means you should have modified your timelines in advance if using your full 10 days could potentially hinder closing, right? I want my buyers to be sure that they are fully comfortable moving forward. So even if they did an inspection, the typical home inspection is on day 2. That doesn't mean I'm going to submit the BINSR on day 2 or 3. I would let them have their time so they can really go through the buyer advisory, right? You brought that up earlier. Look through the buyer advisory, see if there's anything else they want to look at. They can drive the neighborhood, right? At multiple times of the day and night. What does it look like on a Saturday morning or a Sunday night, or, at 7 o'clock at night versus 3 o'clock in the afternoon, right? They can ask the neighbors questions if they want. Be careful what answers they might get, but they can walk the neighborhood. They can consult and should consult with their homeowner's insurance. All of these things they should be doing, right? I want them to make sure that they have the time to do it, and we, as agents, don't cut them short. Don't shortchange your buyers, okay? All of the inspection period items disapproved must be provided in this notice. Buyer's election is limited to the options specified below, and buyers not entitled to change or modify buyer's elections after this notice is delivered to seller. So there's a lot written in there. Let me see, there we go. So, that's why you want to take 10 days when you have the buyer, because once they submit the BINSR, there's no turning back.
I just had to explain that.
They can't decide after that, okay, well, I'm going to cancel. They better hope the seller doesn't accept what they've asked for, because they can't cancel otherwise, right? They can't rescind. You cannot rescind the BINSR and resubmit one. They can't add items, a do-over, yeah. They can't add items to the BINSR that they've already sent over. It's one shot and they get on this, right? So one shot they get. So please make sure they're aware. Additionally, we often hear, and I don't know where this came from, that the buyer was submitted on day 4 and the buyer and agent decide we need to add something. And they say, well, we have a 10-day inspection period. No, you had a 10-day inspection period. Once you turned in the BINSR, you have cut it short,
Yeah,
okay?
yeah.
It does not continue to extend after it's been delivered. Like I said, think of a clock. You've turned to the other side. The clock is now on the seller's time frame.
That starts day one the following day, right?
Correct. The day of delivery is day 0. The next day is day 1, right? Mhm. Okay, so we all understand one shot. We're going to submit one BINSR, and no, you don't have 10 days. If you submitted day 4, you're done. Your inspection period is officially over. So be strategic with that with your buyers. Then there are a couple of little extra reminders here. Buyer and seller acknowledge that all agreed upon corrections, repairs must be performed in a workmanlike manner, which by the way is very hard to define. Okay. We just kind of say you'll know it when you see it. Oh, an Arizona law, right? Arizona law. This is not real estate law. This is an Arizona law, ARS, which is Arizona Revised Statutes for anybody that doesn't know, 32-1121 says it requires that a licensed contractor perform corrections repairs for which the aggregate contract price, including labor and materials, is $1,000 or greater, or work to be performed is not of a casual or minor nature, or the work to be performed requires a local building permit. I cannot tell you the number of times I've seen invoices come in at the end of a deal prior to closing, and it's a $2,200 bill paid for a single item that was fixed, like an HVAC unit, to a non-licensed person. This is a problem, okay? So please make sure that your sellers are aware. So let's put the hat on a listing agent. Make sure your sellers are aware that it's their responsibility, their responsibility upon agreeing to make repairs during the contract term that they have to abide by this law. It's not a real estate deal. It's Arizona law, right? It's not a part of our, it goes further than our contract. It is a very serious issue, right? Well, the buyer can come back and say it needs to be redone by a licensed contractor.
And this is over $1,000 worth of work. So let's say it's a light,
Aggregate.
everything. So let's say they only want like $250 worth of work.
No, that's not a problem. That's fine. That's fine. Okay. All right. The second part of page 1, let's move on to the next page. Second part of page 1, right? There, and into page 2 is the buyer elects as follows. Okay. There are 3 choices the buyer has: premises accepted, no corrections requested, buyer accepts the premises in its present condition and no corrections or repairs are requested. Okay, they're taking it. We're good. We're done, right? If they choose that box, then they're going to sign and the BINSR is done. Nobody else has to sign it. The seller does not have to sign it. It's done. You can load it into SkySlope, right? Taking the property, all good. Okay. Then next it says premises rejected. Buyer disapproves of the items listed below and elects to immediately cancel the contract. In case you forgot from my little poll, you have to provide a reason or items disapproved. It actually reminds you of that. It says buyer disapproves of the items listed below and elects to immediately cancel upon contract. Whose job is it to make sure something is filled onto those blank lines? Yours, thank you, right? So make sure they're putting something there. Same situation, if the buyer rejects the premises, they're going to mark the box. They will list their item or items disapproved.
Leak faucet.
Right, that's right. So I love Leah's language, right? For the love of all that's holy. They are just so fed up with the entire inspection report. Please don't list 47 items that they disapprove of. Just write a couple. It does not have to be every single thing if you're canceling, okay? Don't have to create a novel. just write a couple of items. They disapprove of the condition of the roof. That's sufficient.
And furthermore,
And then move on and have them sign. So same thing in this situation, only the buyer signs, it's signed just that once, and the BINSR's done. All right, everybody got that?
Well, they can basically. So there's there's an inspection, but what about like, they changed their mind on the house layout, it just couldn't get past the bedroom being.
don't use that as the reason.
Well, I'm asking.
Technically, you could use that as a reason and for a variety of reasons, right? You could say that the rooms were not large enough for their furniture. I mean, that the layout is not conducive for their kids.
We saw
Yeah.
that nighttime.
Yeah, we went by,
Really
not,
can be anything.
there-
How you
yes.
put it.
it's,
How you-
yeah, but it's what they disapprove of, right? Okay, so let's get to the next one, because really, the majority of things is, the most common is box 3, right?
Mhm.
Buyer elects to provide seller an opportunity to correct or address the disapproved items listed below. Attach an addendum if applicable. So this is the part that changed in 2022 when they updated the BINSR, and it was the 2 words "or address," okay? So correctly obviously indicates that they're going to make some sort, correcting obviously indicates they're going to make some sort of repairs. We want them to correct, right? That is to make those repairs, right? Address, however, opens this up to negotiate a little differently. So with that, this is what allows the buyer to ask for a credit in lieu of repairs that used to be a no, 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 you could not do that, okay? So, let's see, you couldn't use the BINSR to modify the well, you can't use the BINSR to modify the contract, but apparently we moved a little more into, well, technically, yes, you can, okay? But this is how you do it, and you have to follow very specific protocols for that to be valid. So please hear this, because it can become quite an issue at title if you do not handle it properly. You cannot just mark the box and then say seller to credit buyer $1,500 at close of escrow. You cannot do that, okay? That is an attempt to modify the contract without handling the BINSR part of that appropriately. So what you need to do is list the items disapproved first. So they could be, they disapprove of the age and condition of the HVAC unit, right? There are issues with the plumbing or issues with the electrical. Pretty simple language here, folks.
I call it out too in the
No,
inspection.
no, please wait.
No,
Just wait.
okay,
Let's keep it simple. If
Okay.
you are disapproving of items and want things in lieu of repairs, right? There's an issue with plumbing, there's an issue with the age of the HVAC unit, it could be any number of things. But you need to list the items which they disapprove in concise language. Please, again, don't have some long narrative to get to the point. They disapprove of A, B, and C, and then you can write in lieu of repairs or in lieu of making repairs, seller shall credit buyer X at close of escrow, okay? Items disapproved, and then in lieu of repairs, making that credit request is acceptable, right? Just asking for a credit out of the gate is not. Please understand that distinction. However, like I said, with the addition of the or address to the BINSR, you now may request a credit from the buyer side. If you do so, and especially if there's a loan involved, go ahead and attach an addendum when you send over the BINSR. However, on the addendum, all you need to say is seller shall credit buyer X dollars at close of escrow. If you had concessions prior, title companies would like you to clarify if this is in addition to an earlier concession amount. Did I cover that?
and then
Yeah.
a
All right.
total.
And then a total amount, okay? Don't say anything about the BINSR or any issue with the property or anything about in lieu of repairs, or you're going to send a red flag to the lender, right? All you're referencing is the change to the contract. That's what an addendum does, right? We are changing the contract. Here's the terms of the change. And to change the contract is a credit in that dollar amount. When you do that, I would strongly recommend that you verify with the lender that the buyer can receive additional credits before you handle the BINSR this way. Because if they cannot, you've just wasted this, because it'll come to the next section where it will indicate in essence, hey, you may not get some or all of the credit that you're not able to per your lender. And guess what? It's not the seller's responsibility to come with a workaround for that. So please, please make sure you're verifying with the lender first that they can accept additional credits for anything they may already be getting in the contract. The other portion is what most of us do, and we actually list the items that we want the seller to repair. When you're doing this, several notes. One, do not list numbers from the inspection report. You want me to fix the number 2.4? What do you want me to do with that? So I have seen where it literally says items disapproved, 1.3, 2.1, 3.6, 5.4. No, when you're doing a BINSR, it should be in such a way, and I love this. So this was written by Leah. This is exactly how I've taught this. It needs to be in a way that a third party could look at the buyer inspection notice and seller response, and they can look at the repair and determine if it was made accordingly without any other points of reference. It should be spelled out clearly what job you want completed. That would be the goal. Now, adding a citation inside the request that references the inspection report, just so that the seller or listing agent or the contractor has a reference point, that's fine. They need a little more information, but that means at the end of the request,
Right.
you put in parentheses the number, item number 2.1. So in an ideal world, this is what your request would look like. You will not copy and paste from the inspection report or inspection summary. You will start all your requests with a verb, right? You want people to repair, replace, correct. Start with the action. What is it you want the seller to do? So they know full well what the buyer's expectations are, right? Then you will specify what it is that you want repaired, replaced, or corrected. I'll use something apparently Leah hates. Repair the 4 cracked roof tiles on the northwest portion of the roof. Parentheses, item 2.4, close parentheses, right? Okay, that is an ideal way to write it out. But if somebody else saw that, they would know, did you correct the 4 broken roof tiles on the northwest side of the roof? That's all you need. You don't need to explain the temperature of the day, all the additional notes, or that it's standard maintenance, or that you can use some sort of special adhesive to do this. And this is roof tiles. Leah, I love her comments here. She thinks it's a stupid request to make. Houses have broken roof tiles, right? In Arizona,
Oh, yeah.
Unless the underlayment has been affected and there's some sort of leak present, she thinks it's a non-issue, and yet almost everyone seems to ask for it. In Leah's opinion, this also does not need to be done by a licensed roofer unless there are so many of them that it's going to exceed $1,000. But again, somewhat discretionary, right? All that being said, while they do have adhesive and options for repairing cracked roof tiles, it was me. I would really want to get that done correctly. I would say replace the broken roof tiles, but that's just one example. Same thing, right? Okay, one of the things we often see is that where many of you saw in that sample in the poll about having the seller have an HVAC technician out to evaluate the system and then make any repairs they find. Yeah, that is not valid. Your buyer should be hiring an HVAC technician to come out who is always going to be superior to standard home inspector. They have the right instruments. for gauging things like the split temp differential that always seems to come in off. And honestly, a lot of that is because of their instrumentation it's not the proper type to be used. If you want a kind of generic solution for that, you could say, right, you could say service the HVAC unit to include, and then we know a lot of those annual tune-ups include, right? So it's going to be cleaning the condenser or coils, adding Freon refrigerant that's necessary. You can get a good idea by going to an HVAC website and finding out what would be included in a typical annual tune-up, right? And you could go ahead and put those things specifically down there, but it has to be a specific repair, not that, just not vague and ambiguous terms being put the onus on the seller to figure out what's wrong. The buyer needs to do this. So with that in mind, I would definitely look at trying to get my standard home inspector out at the house early, right, as quickly as possible. And then if they need, then say, hey, there's some problems with the HVAC system or the pool or the roof. And then your buyer has time to bring in the experts. At that point would be where they need to hire a roofer or a structural engineer or an HVAC technician. They need to bring in somebody else to better evaluate what the problem is so that the buyer can ask for a specific repair. So I'm not going to do questions here. I think she asked for some questions. Let's see. Let me jump here. Does anybody here, I guess I will take a quick question. I'm gonna have to watch the time though. Does anybody online have a question? Okay. There are a whole bunch of questions here. Let's go to the next page. Let's see, I got lost. Uh-oh. I am truly lost in my notes here. All right. So let's look at one final one regarding what's acceptable or reasons for rejection, maybe in this case. So we're going to assume across the board that an appraisal has not been done. This is going to answer your question from earlier. It is not required to be done during the inspection period. There's nothing in the contract regarding a timeline for the appraisal other than everything needs to be done in enough time to allow closing to occur on time. So that's one of the things that they might bump up against. But can a buyer cancel because they think they overpaid? Is that a valid reason for cancellation?
Without an appraisal. No.
So some of you are going to be shocked. I want to read you a little something, and then I want you to think about your response. So section 6, A of the purchase contract, buyers shall during their inspection period at their expense conduct all these investigations, appraise and inspections, evaluations to determine the value and condition of the premises. So if they determine through their investigations and evaluations, inspections, that the value of the home is not what they agreed to pay in the purchase contract, is that a valid reason for rejection and cancellation? I see some of you are responding, yes, yes, yes.
Okay.
Sounds like it.
So they came up with it without an appraisal. I think it's worth, this much.
So let's talk about this. I did my extra, hold on. I did my extra emphasis, maybe change some minds of people's minds. This is an often overlooked part of section 6A, that yes, the fact that they don't believe the value is what they offered is a valid reason for rejection and cancellation. So how would you write that up in the BINSR? That the item disapproved is value is not what we thought it was. Yep, value of the home. The value-based disapproval does not require an official appraisal. The buyer simply states that the home is not worth what was agreed upon. A BINSR item might read, quote, value of the home is not consistent with contract price. Now, I was going to ask, how do you prove that? Do you have to have your own appraisal done there? There's no proof required. So just, yeah, this is
For the buyer.
buyer's disapproval at buyer's discretion. So based on this, hey, you know, they ran the numbers, they looked at the other comps, they viewed other properties in the community. They looked at what is going to cost to install, this is a big one, X, Y, and Z in the home, and the value is just not there. So technically, they don't have to get an appraisal. No, they don't, not for that reason. Wow, I mean, they have to get an appraisal at some point, right, to qualify for a loan, but to cancel based on value, they do not need an appraisal for that purpose. But admittedly, there have been times, right, where they find another property just came on the market substantially lower, or they found out in talking to their contractor that the kitchen remodel to bring the home up to par is $15,000 over what they thought it was going to be. That's all value-based, right? That ultimately the value for the home isn't there based on these other things that they have to do. Now, this is all done during the inspection period, right? During that initial 10, 7, 4 days, whatever it is. So we're filling all this out. We know now, start with a verb, end with a citation for the reference to the inspection summary, the inspection report. And then they're going to go ahead and sign this line on page 2, right? You can see that. So again, we referenced that an addendum must be submitted to the buyer's lender, who may limit or restrict total contractual credits if they're accepting or they're requesting a monetary credit. So it's right there and highlighted for you, right? To make sure that your buyers look into this and make sure that the lender will allow it. This little section of buyer's waiver of inspections, this is only if they are waiving professional inspections, okay? So a buyer may still do their own inspections. We just discussed a whole bunch of ways for them to determine value, for example, that qualifies. However, if they don't hire a professional home inspector, they still need to make a selection on page 1. They need to either accept or reject, or they need to give the seller the opportunity to do something. In this case, it would probably be a credit. But those 3 options still exist. So they need to make a selection on page 1. They still need to sign the top line on page 2, and then they would sign the waiver of inspections right at the bottom of page 2. So there wouldn't be a circumstance where they've signed the bottom waiver without having done something on page 1. Anytime you have that, just make sure they're signing both of those. And then the seller's response time. So again, I put 5 days over here, but you can modify that in the purchase contract if you want to shorten these timelines a bit, which, by the way, if you're closing in 15 days, you absolutely better be modifying your contract to modify the timeline for due diligence, or otherwise your due diligence period runs past close of escrow, which is a contract nightmare. Those of you doing investor and wholesale purchases or receiving those, please watch those timelines. We want to close in 10 days and our inspection period is 8 days. How long is that total inspection period if you don't change everything? 8 plus what? 18 days on a 10-day closing. You got a problem. Please, please don't do that, right? So seller's response, big bold letters to be completed only if the buyer provides seller an opportunity to correct and address items disapproved on page 1 through 2. Again, we already referenced that once the buyer accepts or rejects the premises, the BINSR is done. So the seller only responds if repairs or credit have been requested on page 1. If buyer provides seller an opportunity to correct or address items disapproved, seller shall respond within 5 days or otherwise specified days after delivery of this notice. This notice being the BINSR, seller responds as follows. So again, we're all about choices. They have 3. Seller agrees to correct or address the items disapproved by buyer pursuant to the terms set forth herein and section 6J of the contract. Okay, so it's the workmanlike manner, right? It's making sure that you're hiring licensed contractors if necessary, and then it's based on what the buyer requested. So this is why it's so important as a buyer's agent to make sure your repair requests are clear and concise. Disregard the narratives. This is why I always laugh when people put down item 2.3, and then you go read what the inspector wrote on 2.3, and the first line is, buyer should have a roofing professional come evaluate this. Seller's not responsible to do that, right? So please don't do that. Specifically state what you want done. We don't need to know how old the unit is and all of this, what the temperature, the day they inspected, get rid of all of that. Get to the point of the actual repair. A seller is unwilling. The next one is seller is unwilling or unable to correct or address any of the items disapproved by buyer, which in that case, of course, the buyer can then cancel. A seller's response to buyer's notice is as followed, right? Attach an addendum if applicable. Again, then buyer would have the opportunity to cancel if they so choose. So if the seller marks the top box at this point, the BINSR's done. They're accepting it, all good. We'll take care of everything. They're done. The buyer does not need to sign again on the bottom. However, if the seller marks either of those bottom two, then the buyer would need to sign something on the bottom. I put a $sign in here because I'm a huge proponent of throwing money at it. What do I mean? I mean that regardless of what the buyer asked for on page 1, I encourage my sellers to not make repairs unless legitimately I think there's something that might be necessary for financing purposes, right? If there's something that could get stuck in an appraisal as a condition, that would need to be fixed in advance, like an active leak or something that truly affects the current safety of the property, those types of things. But yes, fix. But generally speaking, this is Leah. She's just throw the money at it, right? Just give the money to the buyer. They have to deal with all of this after closing. The seller doesn't have to worry about, is it done in a workmanlike manner? Did the contractor show up on time? Can I get it done and get the receipts provided at least 3 days prior to close? Am I going to be on the hook if the contractor didn't do something correctly? And now I'm getting a call 20 days after close of escrow, or 4 months after close because the repair made was somehow not working any longer. These are legitimate concerns, and it's so much easier. You avoid a lot of future problems by just throwing money at it. So even if you're having to give up a little more money than what the actual cost of the repairs would be if you made them, I promise you, seller, it is worth your peace of mind because you don't have any last minute issues. You don't have any potential pushback from the buyers, and you don't have any future liability. So with all that in mind, that's why the $symbol is on there. So I know some of you are like, but they want to do this. It's easier now. Let me know. Well, let me know how that works out when all of a sudden the buyers are complaining, right? About how they fixed the brick wall at close of escrow and we're now delayed in close and everybody has money on the line in time and it's becoming a bigger problem. So recommendation, dollars. Of course, the undersigned agrees to the modified or additional terms and conditions, if any, and acknowledges receipt of a copy thereof. If they're throwing money at it, and again, if there's a lender involved at that point, we would want an addendum to accompany this as well. This goes to questions. I know I'm running out of time. So I'm going to get to the last page, which is the buyer's election. Let me find where we are on my notes. All right. So let me just talk about one thing. What happens if the buyer and seller come back and say, hey, the seller is willing to do this, and then we'd proceed. So not exactly how it was written out, right? Let's give you a hint. Can you modify the seller's, how do you modify the seller's response on the BINSR, right? Let me give you a hint. It's not a contract addendum, right? The BINSR is not an addendum in the contract per se. You cannot use the contract addendum because who receives the contract addendums?
Yeah, title.
Everyone, title and lender. So there's only one way to do this. And it's not an ideal situation, but I think it's practical. Okay. You have times where the buyer says, I'm okay if they don't fix these things, but if this one item's a deal breaker, and if they're willing to do that, then I'll go ahead and proceed. The seller cannot modify their response because it's already been issued, right? Again, the time clock flipped over back to the buyer, and the buyer can only agree to accept or cancel the contract. You don't want to purchase contract addendum because that contract addendum has to go to the lender and title company. We don't want anything referencing repairs. So what we do is basically draft up a Word document. and I would label that document modification to seller's response on the BINSR, and then they would go ahead and type in what that change would be and have both parties sign it. That's it. Just use a Word document to modify it. That's your best course of action. So similarly to the one bite at the apple up front, once the BINSR is submitted, that part is done. We need to modify it in a different way. Did I mess up here? Oh, yep, here we go. Really, the only way you can do this is do that little added addendum, the modification, the Word document, modification to seller's response, okay? Now, practically, could somebody modify the BINSR? We're not going to know. The problem is if that ends up going to litigation, trust me, they will be looking at when all this was timestamped, who timestamped it when, what was delivered. So, and they will, in arbitration litigation, they will subpoena all of that information. So much easier to use that modification to seller's response. All right, let's get to the last section. We're right at 11 o'clock. We're going to do just a few minutes more. All right, the last section then is the buyer's election. And again, big bold letters to be completed only if the seller has not agreed to correct all items disapproved. If they're done and the buyer doesn't need to sign anything, if so, they're done, right? You don't need to sign anything. Otherwise, the buyer has two options. They elect to cancel this contract, or the buyer accepts seller's response to buyer's notice and agrees to close escrow without correction of those items. Seller has not agreed in writing to correct or address. So obviously, if they're modifying that response, you would want the modification on the Word document prior to signing this election section, right? That way, you know you're agreeing to move forward and you can go ahead and have that document signed off on as well. Then they'll sign both that, and now the BINSR is done. So in most cases, I would say there's a 3-part process: buyer first, seller response, buyer last, but there might be times where it stops at one of those other spots. I would stick with the Word document to handle that. There are resources for agents if you're looking for some tools and resources and other comments on what is acceptable versus not. If you go to aaronline.com, go to risk management, and then go to the legal hotline Q&A. You often see these in my weekly newsletters. Use the keywords like BINSR to access real case studies, legal opinions, and best practices. You can go look at YouTube breakdowns and articles for AAR attorneys. That is kind of key in terms of making sure you're staying on top of this. From me, final thoughts: the BINSR isn't just a form, it's a negotiation tool, a compliance document, and a protection for all parties. When used intentionally, it can save deals, protect your buyers, and minimize disputes. Use your calendar, watching those timelines, use your words, and use common sense. And when in doubt, ask. So kind of flew through that.
Yeah.
Do you have any comments?
I do.
Okay, we got some
So-
comments from Title. Yes.
Then
Yes.
what if the buyer says the value's not there? Can they present it to the seller to correct? You know where I'm
To
going.
address.
To address, yeah,
And in
to
lieu of
address.
that assessment, a credit of $1,000 or something.
Or a
Good.
sales price
Good.
reduction.
So to answer that, hopefully you guys all could hear that if they were using that value. I think the only reason you would use that value is to cancel.
Correct.
If there's a specific thing that you're wanting repaired or a credit for, my guess is it's not going to be due to value. It's going to be due to some specific component. Okay. I think it's really hard to tell a seller that the value may no longer be there because the kitchen is going to cost $15,000 more and I want you to replace my kitchen. I don't think that would fly. I mean, you could ask it, the seller's probably going to say no. It's going to have the same outcome
But what
that
about
you're
if
going to
that-
cancel.
To address, because they did their assessment of the value, you know,
Yes.
5,000, we get 50 of that.
Yes, you could do that. I do think you do have to be very careful on that. And I think I would probably lean towards specific items that you're looking at to improve that value rather than simply going off that line of value. I just think that you could end up in an argument that could be averted by taking another path.
I guess the way for me, because it's kind of similar to what I asked earlier, is, I think about it, I think this is where AAR has built in protection for the buyer. Like, this is your period.
Yep, the buyer, it is the buyer's period.
Anything they can get. How you word it is important, like what you just said, it's how you word it, but
Yep.
this is where it's built in. You cut it short, but this is your period.
Yeah.
To do anything and everything assessment wise.
Hopefully, everybody online saw that and heard that comment that this is AAR has really crafted a section of this contract that gives the buyer the opportunity to cancel and in this case renegotiate, right, for specific things. Cannot be a blank line. By the way, if it is done incorrectly and or if somebody does not write the specifics out there, the seller then cures. And as long as you address that cure, then you can cancel as well and get your earnest money back. But it is convoluted and we prefer you not go down that road. So please make sure you specify some item disapproved that you did not agree to. Anyone online have any questions? Oops.
So one thing that just happened with me, so we asked for a credit in lieu of, for, the following, whatever this amount. And their response was, we're going to fix it. And they fortunately mirrored all of my language
Right. So
to fix each item.
So basically what was being said is that we had an agent that wrote for a buyer and I believe they'd asked for some things to be repaired and then other things they asked for dollars in lieu of, and the seller actually came back and again said that they were going to make all those repairs. In this case, let's hope that that all works out okay. As you could hear from Leah's commentary that I was reading, that really the challenge then is what happens if it's not done in that workmanlike manner, et
Exactly.
cetera.
Also,
Hear
another
them.
example. That gives the buyer, just looking at the screen here, the buyer to accept that consideration, that approach, right?
Correct.
They could reject it.
They could have,
Buyer,
they
you
could
could
have.
Reject it,
Oh, yeah, I explained
because
that.
you wanted this and they said,
Mhm.
well, we're gonna do this. It's a negotiation tool. So,
Yep. So they're flippers and they have all their own guys.
Yeah.
And instead of doing that, they felt they could do it for less.
And here's the
That's what they
question,
did.
did they list all the contractors that they used during this construction process? Because they're required by law to do that.
In the BINSR,
No, in the seller property disclosure statement.
on the spots.
Yeah, there's a section in the SPUDS that says all of the contractors and they have to have their licenses listed.
Mm-mm.
but you're talking about going forward, the work.
Yeah.
So.
Oh no, the seller is a flipper. The seller is a flipper and the seller's contractors did the work.
All the work they've already done.
All the work they've already done, all of that should have been in the seller property disclosure statement.
I don't think it was.
Yeah,
Then-
you
then
should be asking
work that
for it.
Needs to be done, asking for money and some work needs to
Right.
be done.
So the question is, did they do more than $1,000 on the home? Well, we all know the answer to that is yes,
Oh,
right? So was there a licensed contractor?
better be.
And a lot of them will say, no, they didn't, and they're not. Is that legal? No, it's not.
Yeah.
Right? But that's what they're doing. So anybody online, let me go ahead and I'm going to stop sharing this so I can see. I got a lot of folks here. Anybody online have any questions? You can unmute yourself. All right, I'm going to stop recording here.
But yeah, like the other